Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. Now, before we get into the interview, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Pierce Buckley and the team over at Babel Force for sponsoring the podcast this month. Pierce and his team of telecoms veterans have created a powerful cloud communication solution focused on no-code integration and automation. Their goal is to break down every barrier to great customer experience by putting intuitive tools in the hands of people who live and breathe customer experience. Now, coming up soon, Pierce and Jonathan Bayer of Vonage are running a webinar on the 28th of October at 11 a.m. Central European Time, and they will be discussing exactly how businesses are getting maximum benefit from WhatsApp, which is one of the fastest growing channels for customer service right now. So check out the link in the podcast show notes and sign up. You don't want to miss out, as you'll get a chance to see a demo of the Babel Force platform in action. Now, shall we get back to the interview? So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Pierce Buckley, who is the CEO and co-founder of Babel Force. Hey, Pierce, how you doing?
Hi, Adrian. Great to be here.
You know, it's not very often that I have dulcet Irish tones on the podcast, and it just feels nice. So it's really nice to kind of like to talk to you. But Pierce,
well, I've been away for a while from Ireland, so my mother says I don't talk proper anymore, Adrian. So let's see.
Well, I mean, it still comes through, and it's still very welcome. And but you say you've been away for a while, Pierce. Tell us what you've been up to, and tell us a little bit about you and your background and kind of what you're up to now, and tell us about Babel Force and all that sort of like stuff.
So, well, that's a big question. So as you said, I come from Ireland originally, and I studied mathematics. So I'm a bit of a geek and started out building, actually in my career, started building speech recognizer components and natural language understanding models and all kinds of AI stuff. So I come from that, the deep tech kind of area. And yeah, my first business card was actually machine learning mathematician in 2001. I should have kept that business card.
That was on a business card. Blimey, that's cool.
That was on it. That was the title on the business card, which I didn't really realize at the time was kind of funny. But now when I think back, because that was pre the current trend when that kind of stuff is everywhere. But from there, I've been in this industry, in the CX making and the CX enabling and customer service industry for now 21 years. And I moved to Germany. I previously worked US, UK businesses mainly, and then moved to Germany in 2008. And I was the country manager for a business that was creating enterprise software solutions for customer service and contact centers. And so I've been in the game for a long time. And 2013, we founded Babel Force, which is a no-code platform. And how did we get there? Well, from my experience, I realized, oh my God, it is so difficult to handle the complexity and cost of building solutions in an enterprise contact center or customer service space. And I knew from the technology, this should be easier. It should be a lot easier. And my co-founders, Christian Fonstad and Timo Friedl, they had the same kind of approach and So we bundled our efforts and created Balfour. We've been around for a while, 8 years. We've done a lot with the platform since, and it's been an exciting journey. Right? It's always like having a sort of a deep tech business, but that's also in the CX space. It's kind of that's a pretty big range, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're trying to put your arms around kind of like a big thing, right? But also the thing that we met. And we've done a little bit of work together because we did this. They had this webinar discussion a wee while ago. It was entitled "Customer Service and AI: Thriller, Killer, or No Filler." Now, I had to kind of get the thriller, killer, no filler kind of bit in there because that's a kind of a nod to Sum 41's kind of like all killer, no filler sort of album back in the day. I just kind of like the play on words. But within all of that, we were starting talking about kind of AI and all of those sort of things, and this explosion of AI particularly within with business, particularly in kind of service and and experience space. And my position was a bit that I get frustrated because I think a lot of the talk about AI is not very helpful because it's just getting thrown around. I mean, I remember hearing I think it was a stat that said that most pitch decks to VCs these days have got some sort of AI sort of in the background, because they think it helps them kind of get funded. But then the research also showed that 40% of all those pitch decks that claim to have AI in them have no AI in them at all. But it feels like all this sort of stuff is like it's AI schmai sort of thing, and it makes me think. I don't know if it's very helpful, and it feels like the tail's wagging the dog in many ways. And wondering, Piers, I mean, am I just becoming increasingly old, and cantankerous, and unreasonable, or is all this talk about AI kind of confusing and not very helpful?
I actually, and I explained, I come from the space, right? So, and I actually think it's very confusing. I mean, there's so many, if you look at the hype cycles, right, like Gartner hype cycles or whatever it might be, choose your analyst firm, then you're going to see just a wave upon wave of new terminology. And then within the terminology, there's natural language understanding and natural language processing. And I think you mentioned to me a while ago, natural language generation, NLG is a new one. And, the list of 3-letter acronyms just goes on and on. And you can't see the wood for the trees, right? So I think it is very confusing. And just to be clear, I mean, we are not an AI platform. In fact, quite the opposite, more or less. So, when you're trying to solve, when a business is trying to solve a customer contact or CX process, they've usually got a particular problem and they've got a few particular outcomes in mind. And yes, you may need AI as some part of that process, but in general, it isn't the only thing you need, right? You need to fit it into the overall structure. So I find it much more useful to think about what the outcomes are that you're looking for.
Yeah.
And what's the particular burning issue? Start with that burning issue and then see, okay, first of all, is AI needed at all to solve the problem? It could well be that it's solved in another way. If AI is needed, then usually actually you're talking about pattern recognition, telling what somebody said or what the piece of text means or something like that, plus some classification algorithm. If we're honest with ourselves, right, that's the two things that you're deploying essentially. And even if you deploy those, you're still going to have a whole load of packaging and business rules and everything to make it actually work, fit together. And that's kind of the area where we play in, is we're saying, look, there's tons of it. Look at all the AI components you can choose. We're sort of making it possible to put the AI together with all your other solutions to build what you need. And that's really our kind of mantra, is build what you actually need.
Yeah, so sometimes it does feel like, talk about that, the tail wagging the dog sort of thing. It's almost like sometimes it feels like you end up with an application, like an AI application, that it's almost like a solution that goes looking for a problem rather than the other way around. And we get to that point where we end up with people are led by the tech rather than the kind of the experience that they want to deliver or the outcome that they want to achieve, and then they need to figure out what they need to put in place to achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really good examples of this, right? So, like call analytics is like with using speech analytics is spectacular, right? So and it's really impressive if like we deploy this as well using. So because if you look at a demo of it, or if you look at it in action, actually, I mean, it is just a great solution. So it's looking for what agents have said in a call. It's looking for what customers have said. It's doing some compliance checks. It's doing some sentiment analysis, and it's pretty impressive. And in the use case where it's being used for general monitoring and training, it's super, right? But if you try to deploy, if you imagine that you can automatically tell what your real true NPS is, or how customers feel about your service, whatever, by analyzing that, and that's your score, and that's it, it's not going to work very well, right? Because why would it work better than asking somebody for their NPS or for their CSAT or whatever it might be, which of course is very simple because you're asking somebody on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you, I'm not saying that's perfect, right? But
well, I think there's also kind of like the interesting thing about all of that sort of stuff, it's fraught with all sorts of assumptions around what different things kind of mean. And we know that different people speak at different cadences and at different tones and volumes and use different words in different ways. So we don't all speak the same. And sometimes, that's particularly true of people that are speaking second languages or third languages, which you can all get. And then you add in the cultural, contextual kind of like stuff and everything else. And it's a bit like, how do you unpick all of that stuff? And it's just hard.
It is hard. And, we always talk about it. I don't want to get technical, but we always talk about, well, what's the equal error rate is what what I would have always looked for in the past for any pattern, so anything you try to recognize somebody's speech and they say just 1, 2, 3, right? And you take, you check how often do you actually correctly recognize it's 1, 2, 3, and how often do you think you've recognized something, but it's, 1, 2, 7. Right. That'd be a false positive, right?
Right.
And if you reject it, even though the person did say 1, 2, 3, that'd be a false negative. And the equal error rate is when both are equal. And, for most pattern recognition algorithms, it's pretty hard to train that down to, say, 99.9. That's very hard. Yeah. You're more likely to be in the 95% ranges. And then the bigger the problem, the more likely you are to be in the 80% range. Like, so as in 20% error rate.
Yeah.
And if you as a consumer are confronted with technology like that, and that's the actual error rate that's occurring in the background, that could be pretty damn frustrating, right? Something between 1 in 5 and 1 in 20 or something, or 1 in 30 times where it's slightly wrong. So now that doesn't mean it's bad. The same technology can be fantastic. Like, for example, we have customers who use our platform to deploy an open question at the beginning of a call or even at the beginning of a chat. So, how can we help you today? And, obviously there's an error rate in what when somebody types in determining what intent they had and what they wanted to do. But it's actually good enough to be really, really useful.
Well, in terms of, if it gives you, if you don't need to, I guess, kind of like, I guess like throw the kind of the effort back onto the customer, where you end up having to, you kind of have to go through this kind of like IVR kind of process, which is press 1 for kind of X and press 2 for Y, press 99 for and you get all these things. You have to remember all these different sort of things. It's like, tell us. And if our best guess is 80% right, then it's probably cut down a huge amount of effort and time and, cognitive effort on your part, as it were. And people are going, oh, that's quite cool. Yes, you're right. Oh, yes, that's right. I want to speak to sales, or I want to speak to service, or I want to speak to warranty, or whoever it might be. And I think some of this stuff, as you rightly say, in certain situations, it's good enough.
Yeah.
But in other situations, it's just not.
That's it. And it depends on the case. So, and exactly like you said, if the consumer had to go through that horrific IVR tree, which, everybody hates, including the people who build them, like people build, and they're not, they're not the most wonderful experience in the world, right? So if that's your choice, then it would be much better to ask an open question, but it'd be even better if you ask an open question and look up in the background if that person tried to email you earlier, which almost never happens. I mean, we've actually done this research directly, and you can look it up. Others have done it as well. If you take 1,000 front-end call center IVRs in the UK, Germany, it doesn't make it any of the big economies, you'll find single digits in 1,000 where the IVR actually knows whether you emailed earlier.
They haven't done the connection bit.
Yeah, they haven't done the connection. So, and this is what I mean. So there's this fantastic bit of AI. Let's say, I mean, I don't even want to use the term AI, right? That's a pattern recognition algorithm that's determining what you said, right? Let's call it what it is. And then, but then you combine that with some data, and that means you've got to do a deep integration inside the business. And in real time, you're going to ask the person, "Hey, are you calling us about what you emailed us earlier?" And then you've both collapsed the IVR tree and taken away that effort.
Well, I think the thing is like, and that would come for me in when you get deep inside enterprises, and we get into the point of like customer empathy and understanding. And there's customer empathy that's on an individual level, but then there's just empathy on a kind of like a general level, kind of thinking about what would be a cool thing or a good thing to do. Is like if a customer called in, it's like, it'd be great if the scenario was like, well, we called, but we've already emailed, but we're calling because we haven't got a response back to our email. And so it'd be great if I kind of like, they come through, but like, oh, we saw that you emailed, we were working on your problem. Just wanted to kind of like, thanks for calling. Sorry that you had to do that, but we're working on it. We should have got back to you, but we didn't. That's on us. Here's where we're at right now. Something like that. That's kind of not going to fly in many kind of corporate environments. Although it probably should. That sort of level of honesty and transparency, but that sort of connectedness. If you look at people, go like, oh, they're not a bunch of dysfunctional freaks that are kind of don't talk to each other. They actually have an organism that's kind of got it's got its synapses connected, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, some of those you see those funny videos, Adrian, sometimes of like where they do a real life scenario where one party, like the attendant in the coffee shop, acts like an IVR.
Yeah,
those of you, or actually, it's not just IVR. I've seen one cool video where the guy acts like a Twitter, Twitter customer service account, right? And then he just forgets in the middle that you already sent in a message with some details, or has no clue you say. So you would never deal with a person like that, and it is disconcerting as a normal consumer. Now, when I sit and put on my consumer hat, it's just disconcerting if you've written 3 times and then you call up and the agent doesn't even know you've written. That'd be the worst circumstance possible. But then if the IVR doesn't know, or the other way around, actually, if you had called earlier and you email, but your email doesn't get answered for 3 days, that doesn't make any sense either. You should get a message that said, "Oh, we saw you called and we saw you emailed. We're on it, but we have too much to do right now. It could take a little bit of time before we get back to you. And but there's some alternative way to do it, for example."
Yeah, or even just kind of the point where you can turn around and you can go, you call in, because like let's face it, the way that kind of phones is, the way that people hold on to their phone numbers these days, more often than not, it becomes a unique identifier.
Yeah, to some extent it does. Yeah,
is what was your name thing. So you call in and go, and it'd be like, "Hey, Pierce, thanks for calling." Kind of like, if you're calling about the email that you sent yesterday, sort of thing. Kind of like, here's the update, and we're like, "Oh, we're working on it. We expect to get back to you in the next kind of like 8 hours, or by the beginning of tomorrow or something." Now, I know that the technology is there to do that, but that requires all sorts of design and data and integration sort of like stuff to help that to make that work. But that's possible, and that would just be, if as a customer, if I got that, you don't get that very often. Like it's probably one time in 1,000 type of thing that people are doing that. But that sort of stuff is possible.
Yeah, and the thing is, this is what led me to get to start Balforce. Really, is it's not only possible; it's actually easy. But it does what you just described. It's an easy sentence to say what you did, right? The scenario you described. But there's actually, I think, if I count them, there's 3 integrations in there already.
Right.
So there's the ticketing system or case management that the agent gets the thing on eventually, right? There's the CRM where it's looked up to see what has happened previously, or the journey mapper kind of to wherever it is. And there's the IVR that's in place, which is part of the call center telephony stack. And that's the core problem. This is why if you try to do that in most business, if you take those 1,000 businesses, I'm sure most of the folks we work with in those businesses, regardless of how pragmatic or visionary they are, usually they really want to solve problems. They're usually great people. Most of the folks so it's not that they're lazy or or whatever. They've actually probably tried to solve it,
Yes.
And they hit their head against a brick wall because one or more of those three integrations is really, really difficult to do, or so.
Or you get to the point where it kind of takes that sort of like, it's going to require, somebody's going like, oh, that's a big software development problem, and there's custom code involved, and all this sort of like stuff. And because we're kind of going down this little kind of like country lane right now, this general sort of discussion. But you mentioned Babelforce, that's where you started it. So explain to me kind of the whole no code notion and stuff, because I know it's like we talked about starting off with AI, and I know you've kind of got a background in super complex kind of mathematics and kind of computing and stuff. But the no code kind of platform thing, that's sort of, it's not an AI enabled thing essentially, right? It's just a platform, right?
Right. We're not an AI company. So we enable our customers to choose any kind of component they want, which could be AI or anything else. So essentially what we're trying to do is we say, start from the outcome you're looking for. What's the business problem? And then we're trying to provide the Lego blocks, or Lego sets, even in some cases, that allow you to build those together to do whatever the process is you want. So you could think of it, I guess our mantra is we're trying to democratize the technology. So,
right.
So instead of needing very expensive and people who are very, very hard to resource to do this work, you can basically leave the few people in your contact center or your customer experience or customer service organization who really do keep the show on the road. Right? So every business I've ever been in, there's a few people who do that. It might be a dozen, it might be 20, it might be 2, depending on the size of the company. But they're the people who configure the CRM processes and right? So, and they are the ones who know deep down, right, in detail, down the weeds, what really is necessary, what data you have to get from here to do this over there, and so on.
Like, don't unplug that.
Right.
Don't touch that.
So they know, and they're keeping everything running. And so imagine if, this is our starting point, imagine if those people, when you come to them as a manager with a problem on a Tuesday morning, if they would say to you, oh yeah, I think I can build that this afternoon. I might be exaggerating. Maybe it takes until Friday, but but the basic answer would be, yeah, I think we can build that. Yeah. So then they build it, A/B test it the following Friday, put it live 2 weeks later.
Right.
Now, but for any case we just mentioned, right? So the essential promise we're trying to make as a no-code platform is if you sat down with those folks, so those key people in your organization, and you got on the whiteboard and you drew out what you wanted, then our promise is you can build 95% of that with no code at all. And the 5% that's there is, well, you might have to build a bridge to some legacy system or something like that, right? Which may then have some small effort to it. But even then, when you do that, you do it once, and after that, it's a Lego block.
Mm-hmm.
So right, that's kind of the principle. So we get upset basically, Adrian, if one of our customers tries to do something and they can't do it. That's like we're really disappointed in ourselves. So
that's the problem that you want to solve. It's like, damn it.
Like, so if they run up against a wall and they can't do it, then we say, okay, how would we solve that? And when we try and solve it, we're thinking, how would we do it in a way that it would also solve 1,000 other problems? Mm-hmm. That's kind of the Lego principle, isn't it? You can get the set and you can build the pirate ship, but if you break the whole thing apart, you can also build a house or a car or whatever, right?
Yeah,
and that's the whole principle that we have as a no-code platform.
And so they're going on the no-code sort of thing. I mean, just kind of wanted to dig into a little bit because of the process. I mean, is it best to start from the like a process and flow diagram, or is it best to start with a kind of envisaging a story and then you think about what it's going to take to do that? Because I sort of almost talked about a scenario, and you're like going, there's probably about 3 data integrations in there, sort of thing. So is it best to start with the story or like the scenario, and then you can work and drop it down to the process, and then you think about what the building blocks you need to kind of put in place?
That's a good question. Actually, when we look at it in reality, the customers start with both, depending on the person who begins the process.
Right. Okay.
So I think it's both are valid. So imagine one of those key folks who keeps the show on the road, right? They started. Then they probably just, because of the way their mind works, they will probably, and what they know already, they will probably draw out something like a Visio or a flow diagram or whatever it might be, right? Probably not a Visio nowadays, but you know what I mean, right? So a sort of flow diagram it will probably even say, we need to look up this bit of data and we need to get back that and send the phone number over there and whatever. people do that, and that's a great way to start. Also, a great way to start is like just drawing on a piece of paper with, I'd love if my customers, when they phoned in, would get, hey, are you calling about what you emailed us? How do you do that?
Yeah.
That is a totally, and that is much, that's much more the manager or the CX experience, kind of expert, or the UX design, let's say, department, or that persona, they're coming to it that way. And we get both all the time. So I don't think it really matters.
Okay. No, that's great, because I just wondered kind of how it kind of works, because actually it's like, and I guess that's the democratic side of things as well, is like you can come at these sort of no-code kind of platforms from a story perspective, from a process and workflow sort of perspective, for a what if type of idea, and that's where it becomes an open access thing, because everybody can participate, as it were.
Yeah. And what we found, it's interesting, Adrian, is that there's a tendency, because we're talking about AI schmai sort of, there's a tendency to think of big solutions, like and funky new technologies and all that kind of thing. But in the vast majority of organizations that we deal with, regardless of size, it's often a much more pragmatic sort of a situation. So it's like, we get 200 emails every, half day, just for this one particular process. And at the moment, actually, agents need to pull the data out of those and decide what the hell the email means and put it into these forms in the background. Mm-hmm. This is not uncommon. I mean, there are literally hundreds of thousands of agents in the world doing that every day.
Still.
Circa 2021, right? And so the manager trying to solve that problem, they probably are coming along with a story going, is there a better way to do this? And then they probably have tried to solve it already and have had problems. And that's why there's agents still doing it. Mm-hmm. So when we come along with a big AI story, it's often just missing the point. Yes, to do that, we probably will use natural language understanding on the body of the email and categorize it, pre-categorize it, and then enter it in the forms automatically. But that's only one tiny little part of the solution. And it could be that the solution is like 95% about how to integrate the three systems you need to integrate.
And does that kind of then, doing something like that in that particular example, does that then also creep into the realm of RPA and stuff as well? But because that's an approach to using NLU to identify these things and then try and take that information and put it into these forms over here. And it's the robotic process automation part of that. Is that right?
Good question. So no, we need to differentiate between RPA and no-code automation, okay. I think. Yeah, that's a really good question, because it's often a point of confusion. So RPA, robotic process automation, its starting point is there's an existing system that doesn't have an easy back-end interface, like nice technical interface, like nice API as we call them, that can be plugged into by another component. So you have to wrap it. So RPA, right. You can think of, I have to wrap this piece of technology that maybe only exists as a database, or maybe only exists as a UI, is the classic case for RPA. Mm-hmm. I'm going to wrap that. And then after it's wrapped with the RPA component, then I can attach bots to it and have it do something.
Right.
So always think of RPA as wrapping some technology that's difficult to automate.
Right. Okay.
And we will use that. So in 5% of cases or 10% of cases, then some component will have to be wrapped by RPA, and then it can be included in the diagram that the people have put on the whiteboard.
Right. Thank you. So it's always useful to ask the simple questions.
Yeah. So we integrate with loads of RPA components and that do exactly that kind of thing. And that's one way then to talk to these other systems. And of course, they allow you to do some other functionality as well around that. Mm-hmm. So no-code automation is much more about forgetting the wrapper part of it completely. It's just, how do you join up everything that's on your whiteboard diagram, from the call coming in to even the agent. Is the agent available right now? Mm-hmm. Or which agent should we send this email or this chat or this call to, regardless of what the process is between the very front end of the chat or call or email coming in and what happens with the agent, that you tie all of those components together.
So in the webinar that we talked about, we did which was with yourself and kind of Michael Haller of Deep Search. In the webinar, Michael talked about doing some really cool stuff with NLU and automation of human cognitive tasks. I mean, Can you tell me about kind of how that kind of works? Because that's a real example of something that can get built on the top of on the no-code kind of platform, and like by pulling all these things together to sort of bring that to life. And then and then I'll ask you kind of to share maybe a couple of examples of firms that you've worked with and kind of what they've been able to use the platform to kind of do to bring the whole thing to life. Otherwise, it's going to feel like some sort of nerdy kind of tech kind of podcast, and we're sort of not that really.
Yeah. So, we can make it concrete. So, that was before the summer when we spoke to Michael, right, on the podcast. Mm-hmm. So, Michael is with Deep Search, and Deep Search is a natural language understanding company. And they use BabelForce to create the overall process. So, what they do is they create models that understand what somebody says, or types or whatever it might be. It doesn't make a difference what the form. It could be a fax, could be an email, could be phone, could be the transcribed phone call, mm-hmm. whatever. And they will determine what parts of that text or speech means particular things mm-hmm. that are relevant to the business. So, and what they do is pretty cool. They build up a whole model that actually understands that, for example, if it's a utility company, it knows what a meter is. That electricity meter or a gas meter, and then it knows that a gas meter is a variant of that meter, and that there might be other words. Like in some European languages, there are maybe 10 words for referring to a meter.
Yeah,
right. And so it knows all this stuff. So it's kind of got some deep linguistic knowledge embedded in it, and it knows that for tens of thousands of terms, as well as having a general language model. Mm-hmm. And so it allows them then to understand what's being said. I think the example that we had done on the webinar there was one insurance example and one utility example. So somebody phones up because they got a letter or whatever from their utility company, and then they say something that, what can we do for you today? And they explain exactly what their problem is.
So it's like the example you talked about before, where it says, like, can you help me? Or how can we help you today? And you just talk.
Yes.
And the technology is able to kind of understand kind of what you're saying and kind of what it refers to. And then there's a kind of, you can do automatic updates or kind of like intelligent routing to the right sort of people if it's if it's appropriate, as it were.
That's right. I think and exactly that. And there could be multiple intents. You could explain, I got the letter, I don't understand it, but it looks like because I'm changing my address, I need to do this or that. And then the system knows, okay, there's 2 or 3 things actually in here. One of these we can automate. And I think, for example, you just send an SMS and say, use the link in the SMS, and you can immediately change the thing that's wrong in the address or whatever it might be, right? But the other things might need an agent. And so maybe a call appointment is set, or maybe the call is routed immediately or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, here again is the example where you need this great AI component that's going to do the understanding. But then you've got to embed it in this overall process. It has to land in the ticket for the agent and so on. And so that's what Deep Search uses BabelForce then to do, is to enable all that other stuff that goes around the core AI component to solve the problem.
Yeah. I think what was interesting about what happened in the webinar is that Michael did this live demo where you actually kind of, it's a bit like doing a cooking show, right? It's almost like, here's my ingredients out on the table in front of me.
Yeah.
And then you start cooking in real kind of time. So you literally kind of built this demo. We did a real demonstration, which was linked to exactly that. You want an update on something, and then sent a message and actually called in, and then we could hear the kind of whole thing. Did it in like 5 minutes. It was like, as you say, built this sort of demo in about 5 minutes. So it was very, very cool. Kind of how you can do that kind of like and very kind of quickly. But PSS is about sort of technology. But I think I think the thing that I think you and I got connected on is this idea that we're most passionate not less about the technology, even though the technology is kind of cool and very interesting and always evolving, but we're more interested in outcomes and improvement of outcomes. So do you have a couple of examples of companies that you've worked with that use the no-code platform and how they've used it and what they've used it for, and how it's helped them improve the kind of the outcomes in their businesses?
Yeah, sure. So maybe a really good example might be to start with would be Yellow. Yellow is a very large European utility mm-hmm. company. So it's a primary electricity and gas supplier in Central Europe. Mm-hmm. And they use us for their entire front end call infrastructure. So what happens is if you call up Yellow, it'll say, welcome to Yellow, and what can we do for you today? And then in the background, before we ask that question, we're going to do all the lookups that are necessary, see if the customer is prioritized. I mean, in the case where the customer tried to maybe cancel their account or move to another supplier, it might not even ask the question, what do you want to do? Because the aim of the organization in that case might be, we have a 5-second window to get that person through to a retention agent, as an example, right?
And they do the lookup on the name and the number as well.
In this case, they only have the phone number initially because the person calls up. So it's a bit like the example it depends on the fact that most people call from the same number. Increasingly, as smartphones become the more and more common method, increasingly you've got something like 70 to 80%, even for a relatively broad audience. Like, as you can imagine, utilities have all age groups as customers. Even then, you've got a very high percentage of people who are calling always with the same number. And multiple numbers, of course, can be stored as well. But the number is the identifier initially. Then there's an ID process, though, because you can't get through, like, as you know, in most of these kinds of businesses, you can't actually talk to an agent about your account without being identified. So there's an actual identification process. Now, in a business like this, you have to imagine this is at the extreme end of complexity, because this is a business that has multiple tens of thousands of employees and millions of customers for each of their brand. They have multiple brands. So they would start with an IVR landscape with thousands and thousands of dialogue nodes and about a dozen back-end integrations to make the whole thing work, right? So I'm taking the most extreme kind of example, first of all. But even in this case, it proceeds the way we talked about earlier. So their main issue is, well, how do I retain customers? Because as in most of the rest of the developed world, utilities are deregulated and customers can switch relatively easily nowadays across most European countries. And so it's very important to retain customers, right? A lifetime value for a utility customer, even if the bill is £60 a month or whatever it might be, pretty high actually, right? So retention is super important. So that's one important outcome. Then having CSAT levels, customer satisfaction levels, and NPS levels that are relatively high is important, because that, of course, determines how many other customers are going to try to switch to you.
But also also some regulators stipulate.
Correct. Yeah. That's right. So that's right. In the UK, I mean, it's actually, you must run your NPS survey in a particular way, right? There's an industry standard. You have no choice about how to run it, and you're measured by the regulatory authorities then about whether you're actually fulfilling your remit. You're on your license to run a certain part of the network.
Various questions around kind of like how enforced that regulation really is, given kind of some of the behavior of some of the utilities. But hey, that's a different topic, and we can get into that some other time.
Yeah. So I'm probably not even qualified to talk about that, to be honest, but that would be a big topic. But the outcomes you can see are, they're related to real business outcomes, right? There's going to be a lot of money involved in increasing the retention rate by even a few percentage points, actually, or equivalently, not allowing your NPS to sink. Because a utility is going to get the same everywhere in the world. I mean, we're working globally, and it doesn't make a difference where you are. There will be a few hours in a month where most of your calls land, or certainly a few hours in a week. It's very, very peaky traffic, extremely difficult to maintain good service levels. And to give you an example, in other utilities we've seen, it's not uncommon to have a 7-day answer time on emails, and to even fail at that a lot, right? So now our customer Yellow does a lot better than that, but it isn't because they want to answer that slowly. But you can imagine, even if you've got thousands of agents, it's just impossible to work through that backlog in a reasonable way if you don't have some improved automation or whatever. So, but the outcomes are usually at a very high business level in this kind of context. And being a complex organization, of course, Yellow has a strategy around how it approaches customer centricity and all that kind of thing. So that's at the extreme end. Maybe at the other end of the scale might be very fast-moving, super fast-growing companies like Marley Spoon, who, interestingly, the outcomes happen to be kind of similar. Business outcomes, because retention is super important, and high NPS. Now, they don't, not that NPS is the main metric, but in a consumer-facing business like that, that's mainly internet-enabled, then it's usually based on, keeping for example, your 5-star reviews should never drop below 80%, right? Or whatever it might be. So those are the kind of outcomes those sort of customers are looking for. Same with the e-commerce customers deployed on our platform, like Vita Excel and Mesa and Expondo. And so they're looking at similar kind of outcomes as well. But then when you go a level down, they're going to have a bunch of real concrete issues to solve. Like, well, how do we route this type of customer with this kind of situation most rapidly to the right agent? Or how do we put off the appointment for this routine, non-urgent task so that it doesn't fall in the peak? And so those things get quite detailed, but the overall outcomes are usually at a very, very high level business, so, and we'll be looking at the ROI and the business case with the customer in those cases.
Yeah. Perfect. So thank you for that. I mean, I think I guess it kind of helps sort of describe kind of like the variety of different kind of people that are kind of, in many ways experimenting on a no-code kind of platform, because that's almost kind of the fact of what you're allowing people to do is you're almost taking the risk of development, as it were, and sort of taking that away and go like, here's a no-code platform that you can build some stuff and then you can test it. And it takes that software development sort of like requirements building and coding and everything else, and takes that away because that's tends to be one, time consuming and also financially expensive. So taking that away and go like, build it and test it and see what happens. And it's like, you're only limited by your own imagination about what you wanted to test and how you can, and what things you want to build, really.
Yeah, and actually, like the folks who run contact centers are very imaginative and have loads of ideas and usually know how to solve the problem, actually. Right? So the imagination is then not the constraint. The constraint is, do they have the right approach? So are they in a position with the tooling they have to do things quickly? And usually not, right? Usually it's just not possible. So yeah, I think that's a nice way to describe it. I like that because it is about removing the risk and making experimentation easy.
Yeah, because like here's the thing: it's like despite people advocating for the idea that service centers, contact centers are like the beating heart of your customer connection, kind of in most organizations generally that have these that have support and help or contact center, customer service centers. They're still kind of thought as cost centers, and they're still under sort of like financial kind of like constraints in many kind of ways. And so giving them a much more cost efficient and lower risk way of actually trying to figure out how to solve some kind of problems that can have very, very quick returns that don't require a lot of exposure, as it were, particularly financial exposure when they're budgetary, but they're budget constrained is a good thing, because as you say, most of these people know how to solve their problems, but usually finance and kind of budgets and finance and things and technologies are things that have gotten their way. But if you can figure out a way how you can get around those things, then it almost like it unleashes the potential that's in the imaginations of many of the people in the space.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how it is. Like our main user base are the folks who build the stuff. I mean, obviously there's agents on our platform, hundreds and thousands of them. But the main people who actually engage with the product and do things are those builders, or CX makers. We usually call them.
I like that.
And it kind of leaning on the maker, the maker movement, where you have like makers fairs where you build bits of electronics together and stuff like that. It's kind of leaning on that. So CX makers are these main users, and actually it's if you're in that culture of making things pragmatically or in whatever way you want, then it's actually a lot of fun, right? So so that's our finding is people, like, for example, we often turn up for a quarterly review with a customer, our customer success team, and they will find something built which we never thought of, like a use case we never thought of, right?
Yeah.
And usually the folks who've built it will be showing it off, like they'll be going, we built this. This is really cool, like, and it does this for us, and
and you were sat there taking notes, going, "Blimey, that's brilliant! That's brilliant."
Yeah. No, that's often how it is. Honestly, it's more that way than the other way around. It's very rare. It's like and of course, in the early days, it was always like that. In the early days, we were always learning. So we're always trying to listen very, very carefully to these people and to the management in the company about what kind of outcomes they're looking for as well. and we're sort of learning all the time, and then turning that into these Lego blocks, that take away the risk. That's sort of the aim. But we do find people are limited. You mentioned finance, I think, technology, right, as constraints. And I think people often talk about culture, whether like culture is a constraint.
Yeah. I mean, I think organizational design and kind of like all that sort of like stuff, they're all constraints.
That is a constraint. What we found is that actually is some customers must be pragmatic, right? They're not in a position where they can do some huge digital transformation. I don't even like the terminology around digital transformation anymore, because only a small percentage of companies are in a position to do it at any one time, just because of the investment involved, the amount of planning, the culture you might need to have in place, etc. So most of the time, businesses are in a more pragmatic situation. And for us, we've realized it actually doesn't really matter where you are, as long as you are able to every 2 weeks do some new initiative if you need to, or every 6 weeks, whatever it is, the cadence you're going to have. But if you can do new initiatives whenever you need to, regardless of how small or big they are, and regardless of whether they're in a big transformation project or whether you're just doing them ad hoc, that's all that's necessary, actually. Then you're always moving and you're always in a position to get good outcomes from the next initiative.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's great. And I like the idea of kind of like unleashing the makers. That's a good thing. So, Piers, is there anything else we need to know about kind of like no-code kind of platforms before I ask you kind of just a couple of sort of more broader sort of like landscape questions?
No, I think there is some confusion around is everything that you can, is every product where you have some settings somewhere that allow you to do something no code? Because there is a bit of inflation or the use of the term no code. Because I mean, if you open any product, including your iPhone, you go to general settings in your iPhone and you can change a load of things. Is that no code? So I think the no code is usually used, I think, for the situation where you get the power of coding without the coding. I mean, explicitly, because putting the no in front of the code means the code is important. Like you are actually generating real code in the background. So I think if you think about it that way, that it's about giving your people the ability to be high-end developers, just without the big software project that's necessary to do that.
Yeah, and without having to know a programming language and
which is a barrier, right?
Yeah, perfect. So, I mean, you're talking to lots of different people and lots of different industries across the world about some of their problems and stuff, and what they're kind of planning and what they're looking at and things. I mean, so from your perspective and what you're seeing in your business and what you're hearing from your clients, I mean, what does the future of service and experience look like, and what are some of the big, I don't know, hurdles or challenges that we've got to look out for, get around, or work away kind of like over, as we kind of go forward the next kind of couple of years?
Yeah, so I think there's an explosion of what we see everywhere, right? An explosion of channels, an explosion of tools and things you could be doing right in the back end of your organization. So it's very, very confusing. The explosion of channels is particularly problematic, I think, right? Because most organizations, when they're adding new channels, are already not running the existing channels at great success. So I think for most of the businesses we see who are successful, they actually are really good at doing a few of the channels, and they focus on the core ones.
Yeah.
And use the core ones actually to deploy the new channels. Because adoption is super hard. Like even if you're a business that has many millions of interactions a month, if you introduce a new channel, it doesn't necessarily mean that customers are just going to use it immediately. It's like a new business beginning in a way, or a new business unit. You've got this new thing there. Will people use it? So I find that concentrating on a few channels and getting those to be the way to adopt something new. So for example, if you want to move people away from calls, then offer WhatsApp on your telephone channel.
Yeah.
Right? To solve some problem. And then you immediately create a success experience. So that's one.
I mean, I think the thing is what you could end up doing, excuse me, just because I did interrupt, because like, again, you think about the scenarios, like if many people are going to be calling in on a smartphone, so they've already got that, the likelihood there's a possibility that they've got WhatsApp or something else. So while you've got them on the phone, it could be a case of like, you go, so something you're talking about, do you want me to send a confirmation to your WhatsApp if you've got WhatsApp? Or do you want me to kind of send you a link kind of while I've got you on the phone to your WhatsApp kind of like channel? Or I can do that now. I can send you a screenshot of something that you should be seeing to your WhatsApp kind of channel while you've got them on the kind of phone. And they're like going, oh yeah, cool, that'd be great. And then you can say, and you open it up and you go, is that what you're talking about? Oh, perfect, that's fine. So you can almost like, you need to sort of imagine how you would blend those things together. And then you could almost make that bridge where you can turn around and go like, so in future, if there's anything else that you'd ask, then that's our ID on kind of WhatsApp. You've got that kind of message. That's the kind of the channel. It's already kind of dialed into your account. So if you've ever got any other questions, rather than just kind of calling us, you can call us if you like, just send us a message on WhatsApp.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly, I mean, and there you've already got an audience, a volume of audience that you can convert. You've got a way to convert them. And you have to do the opt-in anyway, right? You can't just start WhatsApping people, right? So
No, sure. But by getting that sort of like, working out how you go like, oh, do you have it? Would it be okay? Blah, blah, blah. You can go through that sort of like process sort of smartly around getting permission to opt in, as it were. And say, oh, by the way, we're never going to spam you or everything else. This is just a service kind of channel sort of thing. So you can do that very kind of cleverly, very smartly with it, like in real time.
Yep, absolutely. So, and that was just an example because you were asking about the trends. So I think concentrating on the channels that are working for you and making those really good, I think is one thing. And the second thing is using those to get adoption of the other channels.
Yeah.
And the third thing I think is this integrated environment. So where from the get-go, you're always thinking that everything you deploy is going to be integrated with everything else.
Mm-hmm.
I say that like it sounds kind of obvious, at least, sort of it sounds obvious and easy. But I mean, it's not, like we said, it's just not often the case. And I think that any organization that we see doing well is, even if they're at an early stage, actually doesn't make a difference where they are, they're thinking that way about everything that they're doing. So those are some of the trends we're seeing. So I guess the other trend we're seeing is that is if you're a newer business or you've got a newer business unit, then usually you're starting from chat and web form, first of all, rather than email or phone. Unless, but we have to quite differentiate about this, unless you've got a high value product or a complex sales or sales retention or onboarding process. So we're seeing in financial services, for example, that even when a huge brand name digital bank, like New Virtual Bank or whatever, starts up, they often start up with app-only service.
Right.
And within a very short space of time, they realize that they've got a massive customer segment who are very valuable, where in fact, video call is the right way to go, or at least call. And you see that they have to rapidly build out those different channels, even though you'd say, well, maybe phone's not necessary or whatever. So, and I think it's a very differentiated situation. If it's a mobile app driven supermarket model, which we have several of now, right, in the world, then it's a different story. You start at the moment, you're probably never going to talk to anybody very much, and calling is going to be very unimportant. And that's correct for that. So I think there's careful differentiation of which channels you're going to need based on the lifetime value of the customer and the complexity of the interaction that you have to deal with. I think that's a trend that we're seeing as well, that you have to get your head around based on what product you want, what kind of business you're in.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely aligned with my sort of view around the idea. What's your these are the big questions that I think that people have to get their heads around, is around this idea of, what's your experience strategy and how does it support and enable your business objectives? You've got to get that right. And then within that, you've got to go, and so what is the human and tech kind of balance across your service and experience kind of like journey? Because that has to be relevant to the kind of the service, your experience strategy, and how it's aligned with your business objectives. Is it high touch? Is it high tech? Is it low touch? High touch? Kind of all those different variants, and how does it change across customer groups, and how does it change across different points of the journey? And it's like levels of complexity that people have got to kind of dive into, which, as you say, the people that are leading are the ones that are kind of thinking about this blended, kind of nuanced, very kind of like particular sort of like landscape that they're trying to design and deliver on, rather than just doing stuff and then almost hoping for the best. Oh, we won't do phone. We'll just do app and chat and sort of thing, without that sort of deeper thinking about what they're doing and why.
Yeah, different, like careful, nuanced differentiation. And then when you do that, probably there are 2 or 3 channels that are predominant that you have to be really good at, which will be different. They'll be different for each business. It depends on what you're doing.
Absolutely. So thank you for that, Piers. So this is where we get to the end. And I ask, this is part of my longitudinal social research that I'm doing into the concept of punk CX. And so what I've been doing is, ever since I published the book back in the summer of 2019, I've been asking people that I've had on the podcast for a couple of almost like word association questions. And the first question I asked them is like, what 1 or 2 words would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience?
That's a good one. So, when I got your book and I was reading it, the thing that came to mind for me was break things.
Okay.
So, like as in move fast and break things, right? So don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. In fact, the other phrase that came to me was dirty MVP, which is MVP is minimum viable product, right? Mm-hmm. That you tend to use in the agile space as the first thing you build, right? And I think the customers we see being most successful are not afraid of doing dirty MVPs. And dirty here doesn't mean bad, right? It just means, we know this a little bit from the startup world, where often the best products we know, when you look back at what they looked like in their first iteration, you just can't believe that anybody invested, right? Because you build things quickly to get to the very core of what you need to do. And in a dirty MVP, you don't care about analyzing. You don't get stuck in analysis paralysis, right? You realize what your major outcome is. You realize what your major barrier is, and you concentrate on solving that. Mm-hmm. You don't go and ask, will we get this kind of compliance regulation certificate for this? Have I asked these other 10 people to help me in committee by design or design by committee, to solve this problem? You go, this is my outcome that I want. This is the problem. Let's see what the very core thing we'd have to do, and then do that in 2 weeks. Like we would set it like a 2-week limit on MVPs, right. POCs, right? Because anything extraneous to that is something that you will have to do after 2 weeks anyways, right? You might as well test the core. So I think break things, dirty MVPs, that's what came at me when I read your book, actually.
Perfect. Thank you. So thank you for that. And I'm just thinking about the list, because I've got a list of over 140, I think, of these terms right now. And I'm pretty sure both of those things are not on the list. So I'll add them. So that's cool.
Okay, good.
Welcome to the pantheon of kind of like words. So the second question.
It's amazing. There's 140, actually. That's just really blows my mind.
Well, I think the thing that what I've been doing and what I've found in doing it is it shows that it's such a broad church. And you kind of explain the idea and the concept, and people interpret it in so many different ways. And I think it makes, again, it's like true to the punk kind of movement, as it were, the punk approach thing. It's kind of very democratic, right? Open access. You can mean whatever you want to be, but there's a principle around just doing stuff, trying things out, being bold, breaking things, dirty MVPs, all this sort of thing. And so it translates in very different ways. And so having that long list, I think, is quite a beautiful thing, because there's lots of different voices and lots of different stories in there as well. So which is quite nice. And people look at it and go, oh yeah, that, that too. So that's quite a nice thing.
Cool.
So the second question, Piers, that I always ask is, so what company or brand do you think epitomizes that sort of approach?
So I would maybe actually take our customer here in this case, one of our customers, Yellow, actually, that I mentioned earlier, the utility company, because although it's a very, very large utility, like with tens of thousands of employees, they actually have on the ground to get things done, they have an MVP first approach.
Right.
Which means that, and they have a tolerance of failure inside the organization, which I think actually kind of comes with it, right? If you're going to do dirty MVPs all the time, then not all of them can be successful, right? That's why you do them fast, and you see if you break things and learn. And I think that they genuinely go about things in that way. So that would be maybe the best example that I would give from the businesses I know really well.
Brilliant. So big shout out to Yellow on from Pierce and I. So Pierce, that's all I have. Just want to say thank you for that. Thank you for the education on the kind of some of the stuff that learning about no code and kind of the AI and kind of how it's not the same thing and not the same thing at all, and how RPA kind of relates to that, but also kind of the art of the possible and the idea about making stuff and CX makers. I like that. Sort of unleash the CX makers, because I think there's an incredible amount of enthusiasm and talent in organizations that just gets constrained and is blocked and that wants to solve problems. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your time and your insight with us today. That's been awesome.
Thank you, Adrian. It's great to be here.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.